History isn't just a boring list of dates and names. It's really a grand story of ambition, of clashing wills, and the epic struggle for power and legacy. So let's dive into one of the most dynamic and frankly turbulent periods in Indian history, the medieval era. This was a time when empires rose and fell, and the very map of the subcontinent was basically redrawn again and again.
We're talking about a huge chunk of time here, roughly from 700 AD all the way to the 1700s, and you can kind of break it down into three main phases: the early medieval period, then the Sultanate period, and finally the Mughal period. The one thing that connects this entire millennium, a constant, relentless struggle for control. See, whenever one great empire would fall, it left this huge power vacuum, and the competition to fill that void was always fierce.
So, where does a story this big even begin? Well, you might think it starts with some massive, continent-spanning war, but you'd be wrong. It all starts with a fight for a single city, a city so prestigious, so strategically important, that it literally pulled three of the most powerful empires of the time into a conflict that would last for over 100 years.
This epic showdown is known as the tripartite struggle, and it was all about the city of Kannauj. So what was the big deal with Kannauj? Well, you have to understand it was the strategic heart of northern India. If you controlled Kannauj, you controlled the immense wealth and power of the entire region. It was, without a doubt, the ultimate prize, and three empires were willing to bleed for it. Okay, so let's meet the contenders. In the east, you've got the Palas. Over in the west, you have the Gurjara Prataharas, and pushing up from the Deccan Plateau in the south were the incredibly powerful Rashtrakutas. So you've got three distinct, ambitious empires all converging on this one single point on the map. It was the perfect recipe for a massive, drawn-out war. So after all that, who actually won? Well, in a weird way, nobody. After a century of fighting, all three of these empires were just exhausted, drained of soldiers, drained of money. The most important result of this whole struggle wasn't a clear winner, it was a void. This power vacuum in the north left the entire region vulnerable, and that sets the stage for the next incredible chapter of our story. But before we get to that, let's turn our attention south.
While the North was locked in that crazy three-way stalemate, a completely different kind of powerhouse was rising in the South. We're talking about an empire that wouldn't just dominate on land, but would master the seas, projecting its power all the way across the Indian Ocean. I am, of course, talking about the incredible Chola Empire.
The Cholas were led by a series of seriously impressive rulers. You had guys like Rajaraja I, who laid the foundation, but it was his son, Rajendra I, who took the empire to its absolute peak. His naval campaigns were just legendary. He conquered Sri Lanka and projected his power so effectively across the sea that he's often called the Napoleon of South India. Pretty cool title, right?
And this map just shows you their incredible reach. The Cholas were a true maritime empire. They built a powerful navy that completely dominated the Bay of Bengal, and that meant they controlled the super lucrative trade routes all the way to Southeast Asia. This control of the sea wasn't just about bragging rights, it filled their banks with immense wealth, making them a true international economic superpower.
Now, the Cholas didn't just show off their power with armies and navies. They did it with stone. They absolutely perfected the southern, or Dravida, style of temple architecture. You can see the key difference here from the northern Nagara style. See, Dravida temples have that distinct pyramid-like tower, the Vimana, built in steps right over the main shrine. The Nagara style, on the other hand, has that more curved, beehive-shaped tower. These weren't just buildings, they were monumental statements of power.
What does this number mean? 90 tons. That is the weight of the single piece of granite that sits at the very top of the Brihadishvara temple. Now, think about this. In the 11th century, with no modern cranes, no modern machinery, Chola engineers somehow hoisted this 90-ton stone over 200 feet into the air. It is still a mind-boggling feat of engineering.
And that's really the key takeaway here. These temples, funded by all that wealth from their maritime trade, they weren't just places of worship. They were grand political statements, they were economic hubs, and they were a testament to the might, wealth, and pure genius of the Chola Empire, built to awe everyone who saw them.
Okay, so let's head back to the north. Remember that power vacuum we talked about? Well, both nature and politics can't stand a vacuum. The weakened northern kingdoms became a prime target for ambitious new forces invading from the northwest, forces that would establish a completely new center of power and change India forever.
This change built up over centuries.
It really started with the Arab invasion of Sind, way back in 712 AD. Then came the Turkic invasions, led by figures like Mahmud of Ghazni. But the decisive blow, the one that changed everything, came from Muhammad Ghori. After his victory at the Second Battle of Touraine in 1192, the road to Delhi was wide open, and by 1206, the Delhi Sultanate was officially born.
Now, the origin story of the Sultanate's first dynasty is just remarkable. It's called the Mamluk, or Slave Dynasty. Why? Because its founder, this guy Kutabuddin Aybak, wasn't born a prince. He was actually a former Turkic slave who rose through the military ranks to become Muhammad Ghori's most trusted general. I mean, talk about an incredible story of social mobility. And this Mamluk dynasty would produce one of the most remarkable, groundbreaking figures in all of Indian history, someone who completely shattered every single convention of her time.
Her name was Razia Sultana. Her own father, the Sultan, chose her as his successor over his sons because he knew she was the most capable. But the nobles, they just couldn't accept a woman as their ruler. Her reign was tragically short, only 4 years before she was overthrown and killed in a conspiracy. But her story of this brilliant woman fighting for her birthright in a man's world makes her a true trailblazer. So, we've seen these empires clash, conquer, and eventually collapse. But what did they leave behind? What's the lasting impact? Well, beyond the battlefield, their influence on art, on government, and on faith has endured for centuries.
Let's start with art. Just look at this. This is the Chola Nataraj, the dancing figure of Shiva. It's one of the most iconic images in all of Indian art. The Cholas perfected this incredible art of bronze casting, using a super sophisticated lost wax technique, and they created these sculptures with a grace and a dynamism that have honestly rarely been matched, even today.
But their innovation wasn't just artistic. It was also political. The Cholas developed this amazingly modern system of decentralized government. They pushed power down to the local level through village assemblies. You had the which was for the common people, and the Sabha, for the learned Brahmins. These groups managed their own local affairs through elected committees, a truly pioneering concept of self-governance for its time.
And finally, their legacy of the soul. This era saw the rise of the Bhakti movement, which was basically a spiritual revolution. Saints like Ramanujacharya started preaching that the path to God wasn't through complex rituals or expensive sacrifices, but through pure, simple, personal devotion. This idea of a direct emotional connection to the divine just swept across the subcontinent, and it transformed the religious landscape forever.
From the tripartite struggle to the Chola's naval empire and the rise of the Sultanate, there's a clear pattern here, right? Power is fleeting. Dynasties rise and they fall. But what really endures is their legacy. In stone, in systems of government, and in the hearts of the people. And it kind of leaves us with a big question to think about. What timeless art, what big ideas or innovations will our own era leave for the future to find?